Writing is a choice. Writing is a series of choices, in fact, and I'm making those choices right now as I type this script that I'm now reading from. What words will I choose? What order will I put them in? And what impact will these words have on my readers or listeners when I type them up and speak them into existence? Hi, my name is Meredith Mosley, and I'm a senior English major and Writing Center consultant at the University of Montevallo. Welcome to my channel. I try and emphasize the weight of these choices that I mentioned on the students that I work with in the Writing Center. Many of my students are in first-year writing classes, and ultimately most will not pursue a career in the field of English. Nevertheless, writing in some capacity is and will continue to be a part of their academic, professional, and personal lives. Therefore, communicating the importance of writing choices to all students of all majors is the most important aspect of teaching writing to me. In my writing process class with Dr. Cynthia Mwenja, I've been tasked with finding a gap in composition pedagogy research. I invite you to join me as I reflect back on the principles I've learned in this class, and I deep dive into recent publications on composition research in order to address such a gap. When debating what topic to cover for this assignment, I thought back to the question of choices. I thought back to the first article we covered in my class, an article that has stuck with me and that I have referenced in all of my major assignments thus far. Patricia Bazell's Composition Studies Changes the World. In Bazell's piece, she talks about the inevitability of the political sphere within her teaching in the writing classroom. Bazell argues that teachers should have a sense of moral authority over their classroom in the sense that their personalities and beliefs shape how the classroom runs and what students gain from the lessons. According to Bazell, if an education in the liberal arts can affect students' moral and political development positively, we should promote this idea in advocating for higher education. After taking a look at the existing research on ethics in writing within the past 5 years or so, I soon found a pretty glaring gap in the research that honestly surprised me due to the current state of the world. I found that none of the recent research directly discusses virtue signaling. For those who may be unfamiliar, virtue signaling involves the public expression of one's belief to try and demonstrate to others that one has a good moral code. While on the surface, virtue signaling may seem to just be a demonstration of one's goodness, the term is typically associated with being fake or distorted, using a just cause to make oneself look good in the public eye. This is especially important to talk about in the realm of teaching writing, as the field of composition and rhetoric is stereotypically known to be one capable of manipulation due to the power that words hold. Thus, it is critical that instructors guide their students to avoid such manipulation, whether accidental or on purpose, in order to further legitimize the field and writing in general in an age of misinformation. To give an example of virtue signaling, let's say a popular singer shows public support for the LGBTQ+ community. This singer has never publicly supported the community before, but they attend a pride parade and sing their new song as the pride parade makes its way down the street. Let's say then they go on Instagram later and post a photo of themselves at the event and caption it #Pride with a rainbow flag emoji. Then they never post about the LGBTQ+ community again until the next Pride Month. Virtue signaling. This singer, regardless of what they really believe in their heart, has focused a particular social justice issue around themselves, making their public perception more important than the issue itself, and the people that it affects. Though the cause they support is righteous, their intentions and delivery fall flat. So, how does this connect to first-year composition pedagogy? Like I mentioned before, most students in first-year composition classes will not pursue a degree in English and writing. However, almost all of these students write in some capacity for their other classes and encounter writing on a daily basis, largely via technology and social media. As teachers of writing, like Bazell say, we should try to make the world a better place by doing our proper work of teaching writing to help all of our students succeed in and beyond college. Teachers should then ensure that they make a lasting impact that extends beyond the short term of a student's college years and into their long-term interactions with the world around them. Thus, in teaching writing, tutors and teachers of all kinds should bring up issues of social justice and foster reflection on rhetorical methods of engaging them. Though the sources on this topic are few and far between, let's take a look at what I was able to find on ethics in composition studies within the last 5 years. I will first turn to John Duffy's 2017 article, The Good Writer: Virtue Ethics and the Teaching of Writing. While Buzzell does not detail the exact rhetorical methods first-year writing instructors should use, John Duffy does so in this piece. Most of the other recent research that I found referenced Duffy's piece as a kind of foundation to their arguments, and understandably so. In this article, Duffy argues that the teaching of ethics is infused and inseparable from the teaching of writing, that writing teachers are always already engaged in the teaching of rhetorical ethics in the classroom, even if they do not realize it. Duffy proposes in this piece that writing instructors should draw from Aristotle's concept of virtue ethics, a branch of moral philosophy that emphasizes the importance of following the virtues like patience, kindness, and humility in order to be morally good. By reconsidering the virtues of the past in a more modern and progressive light, Duffy argues that we can teach students to survive in the dysfunctional field of the United States public rhetoric. Towards the end of this piece, Duffy indicates that we should shift from asking the typical rhetorical question of, how do I speak and write to persuade in this argument, to a more ethical question of, how would a good person speak and write to persuade in this situation? I believe, however, that even this ethical reframing is not quite enough to get to the heart of the matter. Instead of conjuring up the notion of a good person, students must connect themselves with said good person to avoid the trap of virtue signaling in their own writing. I would thus reframe the question to be, how can I be a good person in the way I speak and write to persuade in this situation? Someone listening to this may think that this is too personal, but I disagree. If teachers of writing are to use the virtues as a guiding force for first-year writers, they will be required to ask students and themselves to examine their beliefs and try to be good for the sake of being good. The way Duffy frames the question implies that we must simply put ourselves in the mindset of a good person, which I would consider to be virtue signaling. I agree with Duffy's dedication to the virtues, but I feel that his approach here is missing the genuine connection between students' moral codes and these virtues. I admire Duffy's dedication to the topic of ethics in composition classes, but I've yet to find another scholar as committed to this area of research as Duffy is. In searching for the intersections between first-year composition pedagogy and ethics in current scholarship, I found very few. One common thread that I found amongst the remaining small pool of recent scholarship is the authors drawing upon ideas from Buzzell and Duffy, much like I am doing now. By doing so, scholars are moving in the right direction, establishing seminal foundational texts written by important scholars in the field of composition. However, the reality of the situation is simply that not enough people are writing about ethics. Also in 2017 comes Don J. Kramer's The Good, the Right, and the Decent: Ethical Dispositions, the Moral Viewpoint, and Just Pedagogy, which argues for the importance of distinguishing between ethics and morals in order to move forward into a composition pedagogy that is just. Though the two terms are intertwined, the tension between them arises in the fact that the moral is associated with what one ought to do in a universal sense, and the ethical is associated with who one should be in a more localized sense. Here, Kramer emphasizes the importance of teaching first-year writing students that it is possible to both be good and do good as a writer. Additionally, in referring back to Duffy's studies of virtue ethics, Kramer discusses feeling obligated to write about things and the weight of the word should on the writer's mind, and I argue that tying virtue signaling in here would make his points clearer. Rather than asking ourselves who we should be, which implies that people must do something for the sake of being morally right, aligning it with virtue signaling, we should ask ourselves who we want to be, In this way, giving students agency allows them to choose to be good for the sake of being good, rather than through obligation to a cause, which distorts pedagogy from being purely just to being crafted through virtue signaling. While allowing students the level of agency to choose who they want to be and reflect in their writing can promote positivity, as Erica Fricicaro-Pawlowski argues in her 2018 article Rhetorical Ethics and the Language of Virtue, placing too much emphasis on the characterological measures of ethical behaviors of students can limit their ability to view writing as a tool. In relation to virtue signaling, this argument makes complete sense. While being able to produce a genuine piece of writing has much to do with reflecting on who we are and what we believe, having the tools to be able to communicate this without manipulating language or creating a false sense of justice just to get a good grade is imperative. Thus, in this regard, Fricicaro-Pawlowski focuses mostly on how to improve the field of composition in order to be able to teach and assess students' work fairly, effectively, and ethically. Before teachers can expect students to be good people and produce fair content, they must do the same in their own lives and teachings. In doing so, however, teachers must be careful to not present students with an impossible standard to live up to. I would add to this that teachers might promote such an impossible standard by virtue signaling themselves, boasting of their good deeds in their lessons in a way that pushes students away and makes them feel inferior. Again, like Kramer mentioned, the pressure to be good should not be the guiding force for students, but instead the want and desire to be good of their own free will in order to produce genuine content. In teachers checking their own rhetoric for signaling and boasting, they can move away from reflecting values onto students made in their own disciplinary image and toward allowing students to explore in writing who they are and what they believe. In Composition is the Ethical Negotiation of Fantastical Selves, Ira J. Allen provides a framework for examining who we are and what we believe as humans, contrasting the traditional beliefs of the field of first-year writing and the post-human theories that challenge this tradition. Allen tackles the notion of agency, claiming that all writers are automatically agents since we have effects and an audience no matter what we write and produce. However, our notions of self and agency are largely those of fantasy, as we cannot pin down with objectivity what it means to be a human. In this regard, Allen adds that any composition that we teach is an effort to better come to terms with the world through ongoing negotiations of self and agency. While yes, I do agree with Allen that composition is fueled by fantasy, the topics that are taught to first-year writers to discuss in their assignments are based typically in researching real-world scenarios. Composition is the negotiation of the fantastical self, but this negotiation must bring us closer to a sense of reality in order to make progress in the world at large. Thus, in teaching students to find themselves, first-year writing instructors must steer students away from virtue signaling, yet another construction of fantasy, and toward a style that fits each individual student's personality and character in a genuine and engaging way. The closest and most recent example I found of a scholar discussing virtue ethics and composition pedagogy was not through a journal article, but a book review by Aaron Kromer-Twall, a technical and business writing professor at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. Twall reviews John Duffy's 2019 book, Provocations of Virtue, Rhetoric, Ethics, and the Teaching of Writing, in which he engages with similar things to his article, The Good Writer, placing more of an emphasis on digital platforms. Twall informs us that Duffy focuses primarily on the impact of toxic rhetoric, like misinformation and propaganda, navigating how to teach his students and readers how to imagine a more humane and ethical public discourse in the future. According to Twall, Duffy identifies toxic rhetoric with incivility, hate speech, eliminationist rhetoric, venomous speech, and outrage discourse. Though again, Duffy does not seem to explicitly focus on virtue signaling. He advocates for much of what I recommend we dig deeper into in composition studies, what it takes to truly be a good writer. Twall tells us that in Duffy's 4th chapter, he homes in on pedagogical approaches to teaching writing through the lens of virtue ethics. Duffy believes that the space of a first-year writing class should be one where students are held accountable to their own writing choices, open to the perspectives of others, and willing to both be wrong and listen to suggestions for positive change. To me, this aligns much more with what I believe we should discuss in composition pedagogy, which is promoting that students are open-minded, critical of their own writing and the writing of others for the sake of genuinely bettering the self and society. Unfortunately, I could not find any sources published past 2019 on the topic of ethics in composition pedagogy. The field seems to have understandably slowed down significantly due to the COVID-19 pandemic. As we hopefully reach the tail end of the pandemic in the year 2022, I want to urge composition scholars to think again about the choices we make when we pick up our pens or open our Word documents. Think about how to communicate to students that good and just content cannot emerge unless we ourselves are good. If instructors advocate for their students to be kind, considerate, and critical of themselves and others, they can move forward into the world to produce and seek out writing that is just and fair to all people and that does not have to signal to others when it is doing the right thing. Thank you so much for joining me. If you made it to the end, I appreciate your consideration of me and my content.